I'm going to take you through absolutely everything you need to know to play a Death Knight in MoP Classic. First up, what race do you want to be? Well, if you are Horde, it's going to be Orc. That's because they have a really powerful cooldown called Blood Fury, increasing your melee attack power and spell power for 15 seconds. This can be timed perfectly with your Pillar of Frost cooldown, which is another offensive cooldown we have. And they also have axe specialization, meaning you get 1% towards your expertise with axes. And if your best weapon happens to be an axe, then it's going to be even less stats you're putting into expertise to hit the cap. So orcs do really well as Death Knights. Worgen are going to be the ones in Alliance because they get 1% crit, and that's it really. Unfortunately, one thing that I'm not too impressed with in MoP Classic is the Death Knight talents. I really don't think we've done that well. So we get one at level 15, 30, 45. Ignore these levels. I don't know what on earth's going on there. That's a bug. But on the top line, I would recommend going with Plague Leech. Draw forth the infection from the enemy, consuming your Blood Plague and Frost Fever diseases on a target to activate 2 random fully depleted runes as Death runes. So the way Death Knight works, if you don't know, is we have 2 Blood, Frost and Unholy runes. And certain attacks will use, Unholy, Frost or Blood runes. Now, when it says here that it can activate 2 fully depleted runes as Death runes act as a Blood, Frost, or Unholy rune, meaning you can use your Death runes on whatever the hell you like, hence Plague Leech being really nice. So on the next line, level 30, we could go for Anti-Magic Zone if needed, placing a large stationary anti-magic zone that reduces spell damage done to party and raid members inside it by 40%. So all your raid can huddle up and get reduced damage from magic inside that zone. If you don't need it in the fight, though, you can go for Lichborn to become undead for 10 seconds. While undead, you're immune to Charm, Fear, Sleep, and your Death Coil spell will heal you. Again, if you don't use Anti-Magic Zone, the actual one I would recommend, however, is Purgatory and not Lichborn. Purgatory is basically a get-out-of-jail-free card when you die. When you sustain fatal damage, you instead are wrapped in a shroud of purgatory, absorbing incoming healing equal to the amount of damage prevented, lasting 3 seconds. If any healing absorption remains when it expires, you die. So basically, rather than dying, let's say you get hit by 100,000 of damage, and that 100,000 would have killed you. You then, for the next few seconds, have 100,000 in like a shield around you that will absorb 100,000 healing. And your healers, or whoever, you can drink a healing potion anyway, shape or form of healing. You need to heal 100,000 within those next few seconds, otherwise you will die. So it's kind of a get out of jail free card, but they can boot you back down to hell. So it can be really useful, but it's a bit of a, double-edged sword. Anti-Magic Zone is useful, but only, of course, if you can make use of it. On the third line, I would say to go for Death's Advance. You move 10% part faster at all times, and movement impairing effects may not reduce you below 70% movement speed. When activated, you gain 30% movement speed and may not be slowed below 100% of normal movement speed for 6 seconds. And it's a really amazing spell. On the next one, Death's Pact is the best. Drain vitality from an undead minion, healing the Death Knight for half of his maximum health and causing the minion to suffer damage equal to that health. Which basically is just a really good heal for yourself. On line 75, it's actually quite difficult to choose between Blood Tap and Runic Empowerment. So let's talk about both of them. Runic Empowerment. When you land a damaging Death Coil, Frost Strike or Rune Strike, which is, unholy, Frost and Blood, you have a 45% chance to activate a random fully depleted rune, meaning you can get 1 rune black and do more abilities. Blood Tap, each Death Coil, Frost Strike or Rune Strike generates 2 blood charges up to a maximum of 12. And your Blood Tap will consume those charges to activate a fully depleted rune. If you don't know these abilities, don't worry, I'm going to be going over the full rotation in full. But basically, these are just 2 ways that you can get passive runes back. I personally like Runic Empowerment. Blood Tap is also an option. They're very, very close. And at level 90, I would go for Remorseless Winter. Surrounds the Death Knight with swirling frigid air, chilling enemies nearby, reducing their movement speed. You could go for Gorfine's Grip, Shadowy tendrils coil all enemies within 20 yards, pulling them to the target's location. That can be useful in certain instances if you're trying to get enemies in a certain place. Or there's desecrated ground, where basically you instead are immune to causes of loss of control. Basically, no CC for you, the Death Knight. I like Remorseless Winter, but all three of these aren't going to help with your DPS. Gorfine's Grip can help in very specific situations, but really, these talents aren't great. Some specs have really good DPS increases, like Rogues have a really great one. Death Knights just have got the bad pick of the bunch. For the Glyphs as a Blood Death Knight, I would go with, not actually what I've got here, annoyingly, but Festering Blood. So Blood Boil will now treat all targets as though they have Blood Plague or Frost Fever applied. I'll explain more of that when we go over Blood Boil. In fact, no, let's go over it now. Boils the blood of enemies within 10 yards, dealing shadow damage, deals 50% additional damage if they have those diseases on them. So it's always going to count, even if they don't, which is really good in AoE situations and etc, etc. Regenerative magic, so basically, your anti-magic shell, let's talk about that. It surrounds the Death Knight and anti-magic shell, absorbing 100% of damage dealt by harmful spells, up to half of your health, and preventing the application of magical effects. So, with that being said, maybe it doesn't absorb the full amount. Maybe you didn't need it as much as you thought you did. This glyph really helps with that. If anti-magic shell expires after its full duration, and therefore it didn't absorb the full amount, then your cooldown is halved. So it's a bit of quality of life, in my opinion. The third one I would go with is Pestilence, which increases the range of it, which is really good in AoE situations. For Mists of Pandaria Classic, I'm teaming up with Zygor to give you 20% off with code Javier. Zygor gives you the fastest and most efficient leveling experience. As you can see here, looking at killing snow leopards, I can even click all the different waypoint coordinates to see the fastest way to get to the different areas they may be in. It can also look at flight paths and show me which ways to go, including all of the different travel options. And when choosing quest rewards, it can even tell me which is the best upgrade for me. And this will be even spec dependent. I can click on the gloves, complete the quest, and then it will even tell me to equip them and shows me how much attributes and stats I will gain by equipping these items. Maybe even talents. I can use the talent advisor with Zygor, simply clicking that I want to be an Affliction Warlock, and it's going to configure it automatically to show me the best leveling build for Affliction for me. The fun doesn't stop there, though, because it's available for SOD, Classic, Retail, Leveling. I can choose zones I want to go into, and it'll tell me how to get there and do all of the leveling in that zone, even if you're going back to old zones that you've leveled out of. Dungeons, dailies, events, reputation, gold-making, professions, pets and mounts, and achievements you can use as little or as much as you like. And don't forget, you can get 20% off with code Javier and battle past everyone at lightning speed in Mists of Pandaria Classic. Now on to, of course, the main bit, which is the rotation. First things first, get up that bone shield, baby! The bone shield surrounds you with a barrier of whirling bones. The shield begins with 6 charges. Every time you're damaged, you consume a charge. While at least 1 charge remains, you also take 20% less damage, and that is from literally all sources. It will last 5 minutes, and it's on a 1-minute cooldown. You want to go into combat with this as soon as you, and before you go in. And then what we're going to be doing is using our Death Strike and Outbreak. We're basically using Death Strike if no runes are on cooldown. None of our runes will be on cooldown because we've just gone into combat. So we have Blood runes, Frost runes, and Unholy runes. Sometimes you will have your other runes turn into Death runes, which means you can use them as any rune you like. So what does Death Strike do? Well, it costs a Frost and Unholy rune, striking the target for weapon damage, and heals you for 20% of the damage that you've sustained from non-player sources during the preceding 5 seconds. The minimum of which is going to be 7% of your maximum health, and it cannot be parried. After that, we're going to use Outbreak, which puts on Blood Plague and Frost Fever to the target enemy. Now, we also have, obviously, Runic Power that will be generating passively as we're attacking. How are we going to use that? Well, it's going to be with Runic Strike. It costs 30 rune power, and I would recommend that you use it if you're getting to sort of like the high 70s, 80s, and you're basically using it as a Runic Power dump. You strike the enemy for 200% weapon damage. It cannot be dodged, parried, or blocked. Then we have Death Strike again on the priority list. Basically, I'm using it here if we have any death runes available, which we do, and that you've recently obviously taken damage so we can get some of the healing from it. Then we're going to be using either Heart Strike or Soul Reaper. These both use 1 blood rune. Heart Strike instantly strikes a target and up to 2 additional nearby enemies, causing damage, and with each enemy additional struck, it does 50% less damage than the previous target. Damage dealt to each target is increased by an additional 15% for each of your diseases present. So do make sure you're using Outbreak to keep up your Blood Plague and your Frost Fever at all times. It will also apply Weakened Blows, meaning it reduces the damage dealt by your target by 10%. Now, if the target is below 35% health, we're instead going to use Soul Reaper rather than Heart Strike. This strikes the enemy for weapon damage and afflicts them with Soul Reaper. If after 5 seconds the target is below 35% health, so to be pedantic, basically, if they'll be at below 35% health within the next 5 seconds, that's when you need to use it, but basically when they're at 35% health. This effect will deal a massive amount of extra shadow damage if they are at 35% health after 5 seconds. If they die before the effect triggers, you gain 50% haste for 5 seconds. So you can especially use this in dungeons, etc., when there's mobs, etc., that are going to die. Very, very useful. After that, we're going to put down our Death and Decay, which corrupts the ground beneath us, causing shadow damage to every second to targets that remain in the area. Blood Boil if we have something called Crimson Scourge, and we have less than 15% seconds left on our diseases. So Crimson Scourge is this one here. Your next Blood Boil or Death and Decay will consume no runes. So basically, when you see it proc, we're going to use Blood Boil because it will be free. So lovely. If you've got nothing else to bless, we're going to use Horn of Winter, which is on a 20-second cooldown, and we're going to use that to generate runic power. In AoE, we can also use Pestilence to spread our existing diseases to nearby enemies. That is pretty much the rotations to keep up your diseases, use your Bone Shield, use Heart Strike and Soul Reaper when you've got Blood Runes available, use any free Blood Boils, keep up Death and Decay as much as possible, and use Death Strike to take your healing back, and Runic Strike to actually spend that runic power. We have a few other utilities and bits and bobs that we can use. Every 2 minutes we can raise the dead and raise a ghoul to fight by our side for 1 minute, so use this on cooldown. Strangulate on a minute cooldown will constrict the throat of the enemy, silencing them and interrupting them. So that's a really great interrupt, but it is on a minute cooldown. We also have Death Grip, which we can pull the enemy to us. Dark Command on an 8-second cooldown. That's basically your taunt, commanding the target to attack you and increasing threat that you generate against them by 200%. We do also have Rune Tap on a 30-second cooldown, which converts 1 blood rune into 10% of your maximum health. Another thing we have is Blood Tap. Whenever your Rune Strike is used, what you'll see up top here is that you're getting charges of Blood Charge, as you can see there. So we can then use Blood Tap to consume 5 blood charges to activate a fully depleted rune as a death rune. So if I use my runes here, you can see that they're on cooldown. I can then use 5 charges and get 1 rune back as a death rune. And basically we generate those charges through Rune Strike. We can also use Army of the Dead on a 10-minute cooldown. I'd use it when you go into combat, basically making a huge army of undead minions to attack your target. Other cooldowns are Empower your rune weapon, activating all of your runes and generating runic power. To use this, it kind of goes without saying, use it when all your runes are on cooldown and you don't have a lot of runic power, otherwise you're wasting it. And then we also have Dancing Rune Weapon, which mirrors your attacks and assists in defense of its master, granting an additional 20% parry chance when it's active. So it's kind of an offensive but also defensive cooldown. We've got Remorseless Winter, chilling enemies nearby, slowing them, and it can stack. An enemy will be stunned upon the 5th application. Death Pact, where we drain vitality from an undead minion, healing us for 50% of our health, and causing the minion to suffer damage equal to 50% of their health. We've spoken about Anti-Magic Shell, but there's also the Anti-Magic Zone, which you can put the whole raid into to reduce damage taken by magic. Lastly, we have Icebound Fortitude, where you freeze your blood to become immune to stun effects and reduce all damage taken by 50% for 12 seconds. Another fantastic defensive. The only thing I haven't spoken about at this point is your presences, where a Blood Death Knight will be in Blood Presence, where basically you increase stamina by 25%, increase rune regen rate by 20%, and reduce the chance to receive a critical strike by 6%, increasing base armor by 55% and reducing damage taken by 10%. You also significantly increase the threat that you generate. So it goes pretty obviously that will be in Blood Presence as a Blood DK. Next up, let's talk about the actual stat priority you want as a Blood DK. Number one is going to be stamina, and we're going to get more of it by just getting a high enough eye level. So that's pretty obvious. The next one I would say is Mastery, where each time you heal yourself with Death Strike while in Blood Presence, you gain a 91% of the amount healed as physical damage absorption shield. More Mastery, bigger absorption shield. After that, it's going to be Dodge and Parry rating, so obviously avoiding attacks. And also one other thing that we want to get is going to be hit chance at 7.5% and expertise at 7.5%, so that we're not missing or having our attacks be missed. So hit rating is your chance to miss with your attacks, and expertise is your chance for the boss to dodge or parry your attacks. I'm aware that some abilities won't be able to be dodged or parried, but some can. Dwarves have mace specialization, meaning they need less expertise rating. Humans have mace and swords. Orcs have axes. So just be aware of that you'll need about 300 less expertise. Just to be clear. God, getting tongue-tied. Weapon specializations do not affect hit rating. It's only expertise. For the gems you're going to want, in your meta slot, it's an austere primal diamond, and then for each of the other colours, go for the ones you see on screen. Same for the enchants. Basically, I've put on here what enchants go in what slot. The extra enchantments are things like socket bracers for blacksmiths and on the gloves. Living steel belt buckles, however, anyone can get. And don't forget, you are a Death Knight, so we are going to be using the weapons that we see, the weapon enchants that you see here, which will be Sword Shattering and Rune of Stone Skin Gargoyle. And then for your actual professions, well, honestly, go with whatever you want at this point. Most of them are going to give out 450, 480 stamina. It's a bit different with things like leatherworking, engineering, and also blacksmithing because of how they work, however. But just pause the video here and just have a look. And that's it, guys. That is how you play Blood Death Knight as a in MoP Classic, should I say. If you are looking to get Zygor with 20% off, don't forget you can do that with code Javier down below. And if you'd like to support the channel, then you can do so via Patreon, also linked below in the description, where you can get LVO profiles, spreadsheets, and some other tips and tricks, like VIP support in our Discord. And should you be looking for other specs and classes, because we have done them all, then check out the playlist you now see on screen.